Awesome. Well, welcome for those who are just joining us, and re-welcome to the folks who were just in our networking conversation. Lots of really good connections happening, and it was wonderful to just hear the different successes that folks have been able to have. For those of you who are just joining us, my name is Tracy Chellis, and I am relatively new with Rural Forward North Carolina as the lead partnership manager. And I'm really excited to kick back off our agency partner connection. When I joined, Calvin let me know that it had been, I think, last August when the group had gotten together. And as we well know, there's been a lot that has changed in our world since August of last year. And give me one second. I see some more folks I want to make sure I let in. As we were thinking about bringing folks back together in a world that has significantly changed due to a global pandemic, and also a global push to really recognize systemic racism that's happening, this topic of compassion fatigued seemed more relevant than ever. And we're very excited to be offering this opportunity. I want to just all make you aware, you probably noticed we are recording this. I just like to let folks know that. And we wanted to just make sure that for folks who couldn't attend today, that we had this opportunity to share the amazing resources that will be presented by a companion program to Rural Forward here at the Foundation for Health Leadership and Innovation with our folks from the Center of Excellence of Integrated Care. But that is enough for me. I am going to turn it over to two of our amazing program associates who have been with us for the summer, Avery Walter and Sarah Feldman. And they were here to support me in pulling this agency partner meeting together, and they did a lot of the work. And so I want to let them facilitate this wonderful conversation. So Sarah and Avery, I'm going to turn it over to you to introduce yourselves and get us kicked off.
Hi, y'all. I'm Sarah Feldman. I use she, her pronouns, and I am one of the program associates at Rural Forward. I am working in the Western counties with Catherine and really loving supporting work going on in McDowell County. And I have really been loving getting to collaborate with some of the Center of Excellence folks on this project. So I'm really excited about this, and I will pass to Avery.
Thank you for going first. I didn't know how to signal that via Zoom. But good morning, y'all. My name is Avery. I use they, them pronouns. I'm also a program associate with Rural Forward, primarily working in Beaufort County. And again, this is my last week, so I'm really excited to close it out with this and with all of you and all of the amazing work that you're doing. And hopefully this gives you a little bit more help in doing that. And so just a little bit of context as to why we ended up choosing this topic. Tracy came to us and was kind of explained the context of what this looked like and kind of how it was a networking opportunity and wanted some type of presentational material. And we together just kind of found that we needed more than the basic self-care tips that people give out, right? I think sometimes when you're doing this work, and I can speak on my experience as a community organizer, sometimes it takes more than a bubble bath. Sometimes it takes more than drinking water. Sometimes it takes more than taking a nap, sometimes even though that's my favorite. But we just wanted to really think about the weight of this moment and the weight on y'all as folks who work with providers or are providers, to the communities that you're serving, and just how much of a weight that can kind of that you can be carrying in this moment. And so we wanted to think about how can we provide more sustainable work, more sustainable resources, and an overall just better experience for y'all to be able to cope and recognize some signs of stress or being pushed to the edge. And so that is why we wanted to talk about compassion fatigue and looking through things in sort of a compassionate lens. We wanted to think not only about self-care for ourselves, but also how is this showing up in our leadership strategies? Are we being considerate of the folks that we're leading and facilitating? And also, how are we still building compassion with community members and other people, considering that everything is virtual and we're all kind of kind of zoomed out by now, I think. And so before we like hop into anything, we do want to just emphasize that like this is a compassion fatigue workshop. We don't want y'all to be fatigued from Zoom. So if you need to take a break, like if you need to go to the bathroom, if you need a snack, if you need to go get some coffee, feel free to do that. We will not judge you for like muting your screen for a little bit and just taking a time to even just sit here and breathe for a second and then come back. And before I keep overstepping into the goals and objectives, I'm going to pass it over to Sarah.
Hey y'all, so as we are getting started, if folks want to drop your name and organization into the chat so that we have a sense of who all is here, that would be excellent. Some of us just got the chance to really touch base and share what we're doing via the networking session. But just to get a sense of who all is here. And as we are doing that, I am going to review our community agreements. And I will drop those in the chat as well. So number one, and we'll have some discussion times throughout this training. So these community agreements are kind of for that time, just to make sure that we have some norms and guidelines around those discussions. So number one, we've got listen and show you here. Super weird over Zoom, and just naming and recognizing that. Number two, one speaker at a time. This is definitely helpful as we are meeting on a virtual platform, and then also useful just to make sure that everyone is getting their voice heard. Number three, it's okay to disagree. Attack problems, not people. Number four, confidentiality. So just things that folks are sharing, specific anecdotes, keeping them in this space. Number five, step up, step back, or take space, make space. So for those of us who are more accustomed to speaking up, having our voice heard, making sure that we are giving space to folks who might be a little quieter, less likely to speak up, and an encouragement for folks who don't normally speak up to do so. Number six, a personal favorite, permission to be messy. Share those unformed thoughts. Number seven, make the most of our time. Number eight, which is especially relevant today, take care of yourself and the group. So just echoing Avery, step away if you need to, take care of yourself, do what you need to do. Number nine, wear our team jerseys. And so today that is just the collaborative spirit that we're coming together as agency partners. And with that, I will pass back to Avery.
Hey, Sarah and Avery. I'm realizing one piece of context that I should have set, or Calvin, I'm going to look at you and see if it would be useful for you to set this too.
Yeah, it's great to see everybody. And just a reminder, we do have a couple of people where this is your first agency partner meeting. So just a quick reminder about what this is and why we do it. So overall, when the Trust was setting up Healthy Places North Carolina, their initiative to work in rural counties across North Carolina, one of the things they recognized, they wanted to deploy as many resources as possible into rural communities. But there was this concern, and some of y'all have heard this before, there was this concern that all these agencies would be tripping over each other, that they didn't all know each other, that they wouldn't necessarily be coordinated in the work that they were doing. And so the idea was, we have no supervisory role, but they wanted us to help coordinate and make sure that different agency partners, not community partners, but agency partners were knowing what each other were doing and trying as best as possible to collaborate and coordinate that work. So I'm putting now into the chat the one pager for the agency partner meetings, which has some of that background of why we're here. And so that's why we've been meeting for the most part, with the exception of basically about a year of not meeting, once a quarter since 2015. And over that period of time, it started initially being folks connected to the now 10 Healthy Places North Carolina counties. And what local folks said was, hey, by the way, there are some other folks who are working in community and we don't know what they're doing. So we invited other people who were kind of outside of the Healthy Places North Carolina community to be a part so that we can do broader collaboration. So that's the background and why we're here. With that, I turn it back over to Avery.
To give, and thank you so much, Calvin. Yeah, thank you. Me and Sarah are relatively new to Rural Forward, and so we don't always have the necessary background and context and storytelling abilities that Calvin has. So thank you. And to give the last piece of context, I feel like we've given you all a lot of context. I'm so sorry. But we're going to move into the actual presentation. And we wanted to turn to some folks who we felt had a lot of experience or resources on compassion fatigue or just anything around it. And we initially met with Amelia, with the COE folks, and immediately helpful. I think that y'all are going to be delightfully entertained by this presentation and the information that they've put together. And I don't want to keep introing too much, but I'm going to turn it over to the COE folks and their amazing presentation. And there will be time for like questions, and any questions that we don't get to during the presentation, we'll have some time at the end as well for folks to kind of debrief what we just learned and talk about some next steps potentially. So does that sound good for everybody? Awesome. Amelia, take it away.
Thank you so much for the warm introduction. I'm Amelia Muse. I direct the Center of Excellence for Integrated Care at the Foundation. We are a companion program at the Foundation with Rural Forward. We specialize in integration of behavioral and physical health care. And so we're kind of the resident behavioral health folks at the Foundation, and we're also all trained professional therapists. And so this is a really good fit for us, just to kind of transcend this professional but also self-care work that's essential to sustaining whatever we do as in our professional lives. So my team member, Sarah Harity, has prepared some information to share with you all, and then we will have a discussion. So I'll turn it over to Sarah, and she can tell you what we're going to talk about today.
Hey guys, I'm Sarah. I, and as Amelia said, am an integration specialist with Center of Excellence. So a lot of the work that I have currently been doing has been out in Greensboro and High Point, and helping a lot of the clinics there who are integrating services, behavioral health and physical health together. And obviously with COVID, I have been consistently on the phone and in emails and doing presentations with the 20 plus organizations that I work with out there, having conversations about burnout, having conversations about self-care, being tapped out. Personally and professionally, I think it's pretty fair to say that we're all hitting our limits. And I think it was Avery, you mentioned this earlier, that like we need more than a bubble bath sometimes. Like that's all well and good, but that's not the full spectrum of self-care, like a lot of times what you'll see. So we're going to talk about that today. I am obviously used to doing presentations in person, but lately I've gotten real used to doing them over Zoom. But I like to be interactive. If you have questions, I know Amelia, Sarah, Avery are all going to be monitoring the chat. So like feel free to interrupt, either just unmute yourself and just interrupt me, or feel free to put them in the chat box and they'll let me know. But there's questions like throughout it, but I mean, honestly, I want you guys to get the most out of this. So if we don't get through everything because we have a discussion about something, I would rather that than you guys be like, oh my gosh. So that being said, I think Avery, Sarah, do you guys have the presentation to share, or would you like me to do it? I don't care either way.
I have it pulled up and I'm happy to share my screen. Is everyone able to see? I never trust the technology. Awesome. Thank you. And Sarah, just let me know as you would like me to move through slides.
Sounds good. So in talking with Tracy and Sarah and Avery, we talked a lot about how kind of dividing this into almost like 3 different categories of, having like taking care of yourself right now. How are you? Because a lot of you work from what I understand, work with communities or in organizations where your goal is to kind of help take care of each other. So how do you even have compassion for others right now when you're struggling yourself? And then what are our organization setups like? Are they equipped? Are the systems that we are working within equipped to take care of its staff and employees, which is something that's really important. Right there, it says we are running the marathon of life, not a sprint. I think, Sarah, you had mentioned this earlier in a conversation that we had. I kind of look at, like, for myself individually, March 13th was like D-Day for me. Like, that was the day that I was like, oh, this is happening. Like, we are doing this. Like, we have to stay home now. We can't go out and do things. We have to stock up on food. And I remember just having the conversation like, okay, like, well, I mean, this is awful, but it's like 2-3 weeks. We get through this. We're going to be fine. Naive Sarah, working in healthcare, didn't realize that when they say pandemic, it was probably going to be longer than that. So it was kind of like the adrenaline started pumping, like we just got to get through this one period of time. People were saying, we're all in this together. And then starting to recognize, particularly the last probably 6 weeks, that no, we're going to be in this for a while. And the adrenaline that has been pumping and pumping, and the cortisol that has been pumping through my body, it is exhausting. And this is more of a marathon now. So how am I taking care of myself? How are we taking care of ourselves? You can go to the next one, Sarah. So self-care definition, just for you guys to have, according to the World Health Organization, the ability of individuals, families, and communities to promote health, prevent disease, maintain health, and to cope with illness and disability with or without the support of a healthcare provider. It is the individual person who acts or does not act to preserve health or respond to symptoms. So I like this definition just in the context of it takes into account the individual, but it takes into account the larger system. For instance, on like a very basic level, if I have access to all kinds of nutritious food in my refrigerator right now and I'm just choosing not to eat it, that's on me. But if I don't have access to nutritious food, that obviously is a barrier in regards to self-care. So there is this systemic component, but there's also an individual component as well. You can go to the next one. I don't know, I guess, can you guys do the little, like, I did this yesterday and I kind of liked it, the little hands up approach, like, I think you can thumbs up, yeah. Has anybody heard of the biopsychosocial spiritual approach before? Seeing some head nods, okay. And head yeses and head no's. Okay, so I'm gonna talk to you guys a little bit about this. I think it's really cool. You can go back, Sarah.
No.
Right.
I don't know how with this.
No way.
Here we are. I'm so sorry, y'all.
Y'all, you're good. You're good. So essentially when this is like Amelia's, like, she has her PhD, she knows all about this, but just the brief overview for you guys. A lot of times medicine, we looked at the biomedical model. We looked at health in regards to just your biological, physical makeup and how that was in regards to health. But started to look at, over 40 years ago, actually there's more to it. There's a psychological component and social elements when it comes to how healthy you are and how ill you are. And then that has actually been expanded in the last 25 years to include this spiritual approach as well. So a lot of times, like if I'm just doing like a quick check-in, I'm like biopsychosocial, spiritual. How am I doing physically, biologically? How am I doing mentally, emotionally? What are my people like around me right now socially? How am I doing? And then spiritually, what I identify as spiritual for myself. You can go to the next one. So the International Self-Care Foundation, there's so many different models and theories out there when it comes to self-care. This one is one that I've seen quite a few times now. It's the 7 pillars of self-care, like what your knowledge is like about yourself, health-wise, how's your mental, emotional well-being, physical activity, healthy eating, risk avoidance. So like, are you smoking cigarettes or avoiding that? Having good hygiene, so bathing, brushing your teeth, and then rational use of products and services. So are you taking medication according to the label and what your provider recommends? So a couple of these I just wanted to spend a little bit more time on, because I think a lot of times when we talk about self-care, kind of like what we were saying earlier, what Avery had said, is there, you talk about, like, let me go take a bath, let me go, get a massage, let me just get a good, like, I think Avery, you said it, get a nap, which is great, but that's not, always the best or what you really need to kind of sustain yourself. So we're gonna look at these a couple in depth. You wanna go to the next slide? This is just another kind of breakdown of it, but I kind of already ran through it. You can go to the next one, Sarah, please. So let's talk about mental well-being. And this is where, if you guys want to unmute yourself at any time, feel free to speak up. I'm okay with that as long as you are. But having self-awareness and agency within yourself. So looking at how you're taking care of yourself. We already talked about, like, this is marathon, not a sprint. So you have to do little things for yourself each moment of every day to make sure you're taking care of yourself. And it doesn't always mean like go take a 5-minute like meditation break. It's also like, what are you doing for yourself? How are you communicating? Because that is a really strong way to take care of yourself. So I can't remember now if I've already said this, but trained as a therapist, marriage and family therapy. So did that for several years before joining Center of Excellence. So I just, I'm a therapist, so it's inherent in me. So when I say communication, doesn't mean I'm always great at it. Don't get me wrong, us therapists have just as many problems as others. We can just talk about them a little bit better usually. We know what we're doing wrong, but we still do the wrong thing. But I want to talk about kind of the communication aspect, how that can be a huge method of self-care right now. Are you letting other people know how you're doing? Or are you putting up boundaries for yourself? Are you saying, hey, I feel uncomfortable going out with to a restaurant with you right now because of this, because of COVID, and I know that you're hanging out with other people that haven't really been taking it as seriously, and so I just prefer to take care of myself. I know for some of us, this has been really challenging to kind of communicate how we're doing, to ask other people for help right now because some of us aren't doing well. And when we're not communicating effectively, a lot of times that's what leads us to then feeling kind of awful. And being able to do this in your personal relationships as well as in your professional relationships. I just talked to a friend the other day who works in doing like repairs on houses, and just the way that the company's been communicating lately. And because, this is a health issue too. So when it comes to COVID in particular, just it's really exemplified kind of the unhealthy communication styles within the organization. So you being able to kind of assert what you need for yourself is a really great way of taking care of yourself. And then a huge aspect, right, especially during COVID, and this is not just during COVID, but right now I think it's become even more discussed, is how are we maintaining our relationships when we can't do the things that we were used to doing. So, I'm going to open this up for you guys really quickly. If you want to unmute yourself, what is something that you're doing to still kind of maintain your relationships right now?
I'll jump in quickly. I'm teaching some of my older relatives who are definitely afraid of social media and anything that have to do with computers. And unfortunately, with the shutdowns, some of the normal avenues that people may have, like the public library, we're open back up in our town, but, it was closed for a long time. And that was a hub here. Lots of computers. We were very blessed to get a grant from Bill and Melinda Gates to help increase our computers in our public library. And having to try to talk to someone who's definitely afraid of even the new phones and anything new, that's a challenge. It's a little scary for them, a lot scary for a lot of them. So what I've tried to do with family members is when I do have the opportunity to see them in person, and that's been very sketchy because you just can't reach out to your family, go over to their homes, have dinner, and events that we usually have. Can't do that anymore. So it's been challenging, but I have been able to get my mom. They're still not doing in-person church services yet. They're doing their Bible studies online. They're doing their church services online. They are and she just was amazed by it all. She's 80 years old. And she was really afraid she was like, oh, can they see me? Can they hear me? The Zoom thing was blowing her mind. Yeah. And when she's seen me on meetings and things of that nature, she's like, I didn't mean to walk past. Did they see me? Or something like that, that kind of thing. So just, being very careful of not overly trying to push something on folks who had no earthly idea of coming into like the 21st century, so to speak. Yeah. Technology that's available now. I mean, it really surprised my mom that she could be communicating, and she just blossomed when she was able to do her Bible study, because it's a big deal with her faith. Is a big deal to her as it is to me. And being able to communicate and see her fellow church members and family members is not the same as being in person. But I got her into the virtual world of hugging virtually. And now she, likes to do a little FaceTime on her phone. She's learning to do these things. And I think that's what you have to do, is look at out of the box ways, but be gentle and understand that some of these folks have no clue about what we actually do and how we do it. And it's been a challenge for all of us to do this virtual stuff. It really is. I'm like you said, and Avery, you're absolutely right. You get zoomed out. You have to. I don't even let myself be seen on every video. I mean, you guys, some of you guys know me, know I'm talking. I'm going to shut up. But it's just interesting to see how you learn how you never think. None of us thought 6 months ago we'd be in this position. None of us. We didn't know what was coming. So the adjustment has been very difficult for some of us, probably all of us. And for me, it's just been hard to see how I could be, as a person who loves to be in, touchy-feely. I love to hug and be, involved with that communication where I can talk to people in person. I'm an in-person person. I don't like texts that much. I really don't like the Zoom stuff that much, but I've learned to love it because it's been my way of learning how to communicate. And then I just restrict myself on the days, like Avery said, if you don't feel like being seen, just don't let your picture be seen. You can still be a part of everything that's going on, but you may not feel the mood to be looking at everybody and trying to be bright, cheery, and happy. And, you don't want to get up here and just be like, if that's the case, don't show yourself. But, I think that
where people are.
Absolutely, Calvin. But it's been wonderful knowing that we have this. I'm feeling so grateful that I have this avenue to speak with folks and communicate with people and share things. And I think that, you just have to find your way, the best way that you can do it without adding more stress to your life.
Absolutely. It's definitely just you're constantly having to adjust to make sure you're getting your needs met, but at the same time, meeting the needs of others, because they might want to see your face, but listen, I don't have the energy for that today. Amelia and I have both on the weekends had in the last couple months had just like a weekend where we each just turned our phone off and kind of like kept each other accountable, because it's like we just need a break. We just can't do it anymore. Technology, we're so inundated with it right now, and while it's wonderful, it's also a lot to take in. Absolutely. I just want to make sure you guys saw what was in the chat going on too. Margaret, you mentioned having a new way of greeting people instead of saying like, how are you? I have had the same experience. Like, how long do you have? Like, do you really want to know how I am right now? And I think Calvin had mentioned, instead of saying that, he's saying, how are you managing? And that is a great idea, because it's true. It's like, you don't want to say like, how are you? And then it gets into, well, X, Y, and Z are currently going on within my home. And as we know, we got these 18 fires burning all around us. So you're right, it can be very upsetting and just very down. So I appreciate that. That was awesome. All right, can you go to the next slide for me, Sarah, please? So just a little ice cube for you. You better check yourself before you wreck yourself. Are you checking in with yourself? So checking your battery. How are you currently feeling? Great, good, okay, meh, struggling, empty. First of all, I like the visual with this, just literally thinking of it like a battery. A lot of times too, when it comes to irritation and anger, which I know a lot of us, myself included, have experienced more of because of COVID these last 6 months, is so just kind of like rating, where am I at? If I'm, really at a meh right now, what can I do to at least start to feel okay? Is there something that I need to be doing? Can I be extra kind or gracious towards myself, or do something that's right now going to help me feel a little bit better? We want to try to do our best to avoid getting to full-blown empty that often. Because that being said, we're probably going to have a morning when we wake up and we're feeling pretty low, or just kind of a moment after the end of maybe a long day where we're just really not doing great. And it's not to shame yourself for feeling that way, because that's completely normal, especially right now. But making sure you're checking with yourself and saying, well, what can I do to improve and make myself feel a little bit better, so we don't stay in that low place. Next slide, please. The other thing I want to talk about, and we've already kind of talked about it a little bit, and also Sarah and Avery, if you can just, when I'm getting too crazy with time, just interject, please, sorry. But is risk avoidance and mitigating any sort of risk. So obviously right now, the biggest risk that comes to mind is obviously contracting COVID or giving it to somebody else, especially if, maybe we have it and we don't know, because we're one of those asymptomatic individuals. So obviously, like, that's the first thing that we think of, and we're all kind of constantly monitoring that. But the other thing is when it comes to risk, is thinking about our boundaries and expressing our boundaries and managing conflict right now. I think I gave the example earlier. I don't know about you all, but I will only speak for myself, that I've had to have kind of conversations with a lot of people in my circle, whether they've been family or friends, about kind of what are their boundaries when it comes to COVID right now, what are ours, what are we willing to do, are we willing to hang out in the backyard together, or are we not, and being comfortable speaking up for yourself right now of what you're comfortable with versus not, because there are certain people who, I'm sure you all know some, who are kind of doing everything right now and living life fairly typically. And there's others of us who aren't. And having that conversation, which can be tricky, of what are your boundaries right now? So obviously I'm talking about this in regards to COVID, but this goes beyond that too. So, let's think of this wonderful time when COVID is not a consistent threat in our lives. And think about a time where, you have a friendship with somebody and you need to let them know, like, hey, I'm not comfortable with X, Y, and Z that I saw that was happening, at your house. Or saying, I don't feel like, we can spend time together anymore in this X, Y, and Z. So just kind of for yourself, what do you guys think of when, if anybody has kind of a thought for this, what do you think about healthy boundaries right now, expressing boundaries, managing kind of conflict right now? What comes up for you when I mention those things, given the context that we're currently in? Tracy mentioned seeing a great article about the need to renegotiate social norms and have those conversations with our friends and family. Oh, Sarah, anytime I talk with a friend, I lead with, I'm social distancing hard. Yeah, and having to be kind of pretty explicit about that. Yeah, we've had a family member who recently had a baby, and it's that difficult balance of she really needs help right now, but also it's you know, it's scary for her to accept help right now or to ask for it because of COVID. Jackie said, learning to let go of what I cannot control. Yes, yes, yes. Very true. All right. If you can go to the next slide, Sarah. Thank you, guys. Just some barriers to self-care. This is in general, not necessarily COVID related. So it's ironic because I think this slide I actually came up with pre-COVID. So for it to say, the lifestyle disease won't happen to me, kind of like how people think, well, like, you know, hypertension won't happen to me, whatever. It's, some people have that kind of theory with COVID now, like, oh, it's not going to happen to me, I'm not a risk. But that's not necessarily true. So other barriers to self-care is something that you're, you know, saying, I'm just going to start that tomorrow. I have bigger things I have to deal with today. We've all got something, you know, I'll work on managing my relations in a more healthy way tomorrow. Lifestyle modification is hard to keep up with. I don't have time, money, energy for it. I think that's more so looking at, is targeted more kind of like, I think the general stuff that people think of like meaningful movement and how you're eating. But at the same time, that also applies to being more assertive and speaking up for yourself, and what you're comfortable with, and establishing healthy boundaries. Like making those personal changes are really difficult to do too, but they're also very healthy and going to make you feel better in the long run. Do you mind going to the next slide, Sarah? This is just a nice visual that I liked, kind of putting yourself in the middle and just these different aspects of what you kind of have some degree of control with, not all, but some. So power of the mind, how you're relaxing and taking care of yourself mentally, how you're moving your body. One of the things I think in a training in the last year, we talked a lot about stop not saying the word exercise because of the connotations that that can have with it, especially if you have, for some reason, you know, if you have some sort of physical disability, that's like not, you know, saying exercise can just have this whole stigma and thoughts attached to it that maybe aren't helpful. But if you're doing something meaningful with your body that day, that's helpful to your body, that's important. What are your surroundings like, which you may have control over, but maybe you don't. Maybe the only thing within your control, because, you know, like I grew up in a like 1,000 square foot house with 5 people. So getting your own nice little space was really not an option, but I could lay in my bed with the covers over my head, and that was really quite nice. So whatever is within your control. So yeah, looking at how you're nourishing your body, how you're recharging, how your relationships are, that sort of thing. Can you go to the next slide, please? This is just a visual I wanted to give you guys from the World Health Organization. They created this, I think, back in April. I can't really remember if it's released in April or May for COVID, but it kind of gets back to some of that stuff that we were talking about, where it's more than just taking a nap, but also, like you had mentioned, Jackie, like what is within our locus of control. There's a lot of this that we can't control. So really just focusing on what is within your reach is much more helpful. Expressing gratitude. So it's not ignoring the fact or invalidating that we are all struggling, but at the same time, I think like what was discussed in the chat, like we can't just focus on that the entire time because that's also going to make us feel really down. So expressing gratitude for kind of, or recognizing what went well today, or in this current moment, what I'm currently happy and grateful for. Choosing how to react. We actually do have a choice. It's real hard sometimes to choose how to react, but with practice, we can get better at that. Again, therapists know the best things. Don't always choose the best way to react, doesn't matter. Giving yourself time to feel your feelings. Again, that sounds like a cheesy kind of therapist thing to say, but at the same time, if you continuously try to talk yourself out of how you're feeling, sometimes that just makes you feel completely invalidated. You know, like sometimes you do just need to go in your room and have a good cry for 5 minutes and then come out, or whatever that is that's helpful for you. Being very, very patient with yourself and giving yourself grace, because things are changing constantly and our minds and bodies can only keep up so much. So I think we can all agree that things we're getting updates constantly about what is changing. And it's like whiplash, just like nonstop. And so that's a lot for our brains to manage. So just giving yourself some grace and patience that this is hard. We're all struggling, and don't beat yourself up. It's another one of those don't should yourself. Like, you should be able to handle this. You should be able to stick to your schedule. You should be able to work just as effectively at home with your dogs and children and partner running around you. Like, no, it's a challenging time, and that's okay. And continuing to practice those boundaries. And next slide, please, Sarah. So again, this is a little therapist-y thing for you guys, but kind of talking about that self-care beyond just the normal, we'll take yourself for a 5-minute walk, but sticking to your boundaries, taking care of yourself. You have to take care of yourself before you can take care of others. And I think particularly those who are in relationships or are taking care of loved ones, whether it's your parents are taking care of or children or another family member, it's really hard to remember that you also need to take care of yourself in order to be able to better take care of others. Giving yourself permission to rest. Notice when you're pushing yourself too hard, or having somebody else call that out for you sometimes is helpful in a loving way. Feeling your feelings without shame. Accepting and being okay with this is not going perfect, that maybe today is great, but next week was, is awful, and that's all right. Saying no when your gut says no, listening to that. Putting those boundaries in of walking away from relationships that aren't helpful to you right now. Being okay with not being busy. This has been interesting for me. I usually spend about 8 to 10 hours in the car each week for work. I was traveling to and from Greensboro from the Triangle all the time. And now I'm like, wait a second, I'm not doing that anymore. I suddenly had 8 to 10 more hours available to me. And I was like, what do I do? How do I occupy my time? Which I recognize as a privilege too. And forgiving yourself when you fall out of routine. Things don't go well today, it's all right. You got tomorrow, it's okay. Next screen, please, or slide. So these are a few questions that I just kind of want you to, I'm going to ask all of them right now, and then if just one sticks out to you, you want to unmute yourself and share, that would be great. So how are you taking care of yourselves outside of the regular self-care recommendation? What does self-care and connection look like to you right now? Are you holding somebody else accountable? And if so, what does that look like? And how are you setting boundaries? Anybody have anything they'd want to share with that?
One thing that I've been doing recently is actually kind of establishing a more regular, more consistent routine, because so much stuff feels out of control, and being able to have like some consistent practices first thing in the morning and late at night have been really useful in just creating some regularity and normalcy for myself.
I like that. Ooh, Margaret, do you mind sharing a little bit more about those phrases begin again and win ugly?
Sure, and they're not mine. They come from like a workout video series, actually, which is also part of my self-care. But, the way this person who talks about them describes them is like, there will be like so many opportunities to fail and begin again. And like beginning again is an easy thing. Like, you don't have to like fix the fact that you like failed before, you just begin again. And then winning ugly is particularly helpful for me because perfectionism is like one of the demons that besets both me and then like through me, my coworkers, unfortunately. But then also like feeds into perfectionism directed internally at the job that I'm doing in life or at work, etc. And so, I'll say another phrase along with win ugly that I have found useful is anything worth doing is worth doing poorly. So I think that's a very helpful phrase if you have perfectionist tendencies, to just like help you remember that like it's okay to just get it done sometimes. Perfection is not, nor it should it usually be, the goal.
That's really awesome. I like that a lot. Thank you. Avery mentioned having to distinguish how much of my behaviors are purely avoidance versus needed self-care. Doing things I like is the need. That's awesome. Yeah. It's like, am I just avoiding doing this because I just don't feel like doing it right now? Or am I not doing it because I'm just so over and burned out? Yeah, totally.
I will add about boundaries. I've been very mindful and trying to be proactive about boundaries of stimulation. Like sometimes I just need quiet time in our house with no TV or music or noises going on in the kitchen, and so I have to tell my husband, like, can you please be quiet for, you know, I need like 40 minutes or so. I just need to like decompress with no stimulation. And so that's one boundary that's helped a lot with this time, because it seems like my threshold for getting overwhelmed is a lot lower.
Yeah, that's very true. And Margaret, you said, how much energy do I spend avoiding feeling my feelings versus giving myself a break? And which is which? Very true. It's kind of like, do I just need to succumb to this right now? Or do I just need to like try to do something to maybe change it or whatnot? Awesome. Thank you guys. Well, Sarah, if you can go to the next slide, we'll go into having compassion for others. You can go to the next slide again. So talking like Sarah and Avery had mentioned at the beginning about compassion fatigue and what that actually even means. So including emotional, physical, spiritual distress in those providing care to another. Caregiving where people or animals are experiencing significant emotional or physical pain and suffering. And what does that look like? I think a lot of times it typically, when you first hear about it, it's, you know, if you are perhaps the full-time caregiver of a family member, or if you are a medical provider and you are, you know, perhaps overworked and seeing, you know, 25 plus patients a day and working long hours, experiencing some of that compassion fatigue. So providing authentic, sustainable self-care daily can help manage symptoms. A lot of times symptoms of compassion fatigue will be like wanting to really isolate, having these big emotional outbursts. A lot of times you hear kind of just, you don't even care as much anymore. It's just like, ugh, yeah, I've been there, done that. That's a huge red flag, but it's, you know, you kind of lose that ability to feel empathy for your patients perhaps, or those you're caring for. Persistent physical ailments, recurring nightmares or flashbacks. And the physical ailments is sometimes when our bodies mentally and emotionally are so drained, we'll have symptoms within our body that come out in physical ways too, like back pain, shoulder tension, that sort of thing. Next slide. This is just, I thought was an interesting list from the Healthy Caregiving website. But it's just 10 laws for how to make sure that you're doing it. So sustaining compassion, which a lot of times just comes with reminding yourself that these are still individual people at the end of the day with thoughts and feelings that you're caring for. Practicing authentic, sustainable self-care daily, having a support system, having a strong balance. That can be really tricky if you're in a role or organization that doesn't really allow you to have that balance. So kind of figuring out what you can do to improve that. Having humor, letting go, staying optimistic, really praising yourself when things are going well. Next slide, please. So looking at kind of how are we having compassion for others in our community, or for those that you're working with, if we put this on you guys in that regard. So how are you checking in with your community members? How are you building your relationships virtually? How are you accounting for the effects of what's currently going on within your community and for your community members? So what are you guys doing right now to kind of have compassion for others? Do you feel like you're suffering from compassion fatigue to a certain degree? This is where you guys can share. Obviously, I put some answers in there, but I want to hear what you guys are doing right now.
One thing that I've noticed with community partners and working with them is kind of just the very different responses, especially when we're working with frontline providers, how there can be, on the one hand, some folks seem to be very much in like the fight or flight, and they're mobilizing and they are just bringing all of this energy. And then other folks seem to be more in that freeze where everything's changing so rapidly and there's like some uncertainty in how to respond. And both of those are also things that I relate to just on a personal level.
Sure. Absolutely. Mary Jane, you said you've been trying to call people, which can be easier than Zooming and more personal than emailing. That's a really good point. Whether they're your people in your circle personally or if they are from work, absolutely. Tracy, you're reaching out to check in with people more. Catherine, spending more time trying to reach out to call folks one-on-one. Oh yeah, doing phone versus Zoom, Tracy, to give people a break, a Zoom break, and providing space for them to talk and being a listener. I think that's a huge thing, is just kind of going back to what you guys were saying earlier. I think Calvin, you said about saying, how are you managing? And in the beginning of the phone call, and maybe it's kind of the therapist in me, I don't know, but I like kind of give people the space to say, like, you know, what is really going on? Because for some of them, I think, at least just in the role that I play, it's kind of not the only time, but it's one of the few times that they can kind of really share, like, this is what we're dealing with, this is what's going on right now. And just having that space to talk is helpful. So yeah, so checking in with members or people that you know. And I think too, think about this on a personal level too, of, so not just with your community partners, but the community that you live in. Is there anything that you're doing right now to have compassion for others? I'm in like the Facebook group for our neighborhood, and there's a woman who works for disability rights, and their organization is collecting cards for some of the skilled facilities that were hit really hard with COVID. So she was, sent out to our neighbors, like, hey, like, if you guys want to write cards for any of these residents and the workers in these facilities, they're struggling really now, we're going to drop them off. So just like little things like, what are you doing? Or, like you said, just calling people in your circle is definitely helpful. Next slide, please. So just talking a little bit about post-traumatic growth, not to kind of jump the gun, but also recognizing that this is a season in our lives, and knock on all the wood, this is not what we're dealing with for the foreseeable long-term future. But kind of thinking about this in regards to resilience, and research has started to look at that, not in relation to COVID necessarily, though it has been discussed, but just in general in regards to trauma. Because for many people, this will be a traumatic experience in their lives. So looking at this in the absence of adverse lasting mental health effects following a disaster, this could be considered a disaster, particularly employees in disaster exposed organizations. So I think a lot of times it's easy to think of like New York when they were in the height of so many deaths, particularly in the city, what that was like for them. So what are sort of those protective factors? So having training, experience, personal competence, having social support and coping strategies is very helpful. And employees experience a greater appreciation of life and their relationships, enhancing their self-esteem, because you think like, hey, look what I just did to help others during this trauma, and providing a sense of accomplishment and better understanding of their work. I think for a lot of people, we have talked lately in healthcare, and I'm just going to speak for my circle that I've been working with. It's really kind of this experience has really emphasized and highlighted the problems within our systems that aren't working well. So this has been a horrific experience, but at the same time, recognizing that maybe now that some of these issues have gotten more exposure, we can change for the better. So next slide. So some of this we kind of already talked about in regards to, like, especially how are we thinking about communication critically. I think some of you all had mentioned, you know, the ways that you're trying to communicate differently. And are we making sure our associates or those we're working with have the resources and ability to do the things that we ask them? I know, like, for myself in my role, I've had to change how I'm asking of certain things from people. Do any of these kind of questions resonate with any of you guys? Anything you want to share?
One thing that's come up for me as I engage with folks is just the importance of recognizing that, like, while I'm operating day to day from this pretty privileged space of working from home and being able to avoid a lot of the risks and fallout from everything that's happening on a personal level, recognizing that a lot of the folks I'm engaging with, both personally and professionally, some are frontline healthcare workers, some have lost their job, some have a friend or family member who has coronavirus. And just going into those spaces and those interactions with that recognition that, as hard as this experience may be for me in some ways, there are folks who are much more exposed than I am, and kind of thinking about what steps can I be taking just as a human in the world to try to make this situation better for just folks across the board.
Yeah, and it's like, I think having that delicate balance of recognizing the privileges, like, same here, that I have. Like, I'm not currently caring for any children or any family members. You know, it's just my partner and I, and we have a roof and we have jobs, and that's huge. Recognizing that, hey, we're struggling in other ways. We're not, you know, financially struggling as a result of COVID, but, you know, obviously it's emotionally hard. And so recognizing that, but then recognizing how difficult other people have and what is my role, because I know there's so many other people that are struggling right now. What can I do, like you said, as a member of my community, to make sure that I'm helping to care for others who are not as privileged of a role as I am right now, or position. All right, Sarah, if you want to go to the next slide for me. So talking a little bit about compassion within your organization. So your leadership and organization can help prevent burnout and promote self-care. Amelia and I have done a lot of work lately looking at organizational health because we have recognized, as I'm sure many of you have, your organization can make or break you. You can love your job and what your job description is, but if you are working in an unhealthy system, it don't matter. You're going to be miserable, chances are. So we've been lucky enough to start to do some work on helping kind of some select organizations improve, you know, how they are functioning so that they are healthy for their employees, because especially these organizations that are set up to care for others, if it's dysfunctional and a mess within the system, how in the world are these employees supposed to help care for others? So you can go to the next slide, Sarah. So this is just a visual for you guys about burnout. We're going to talk about a little bit, we've talked about compassion fatigue. Secondary traumatization is a lot of times what can happen for care providers. So for instance, if I am working with an individual who has experienced abuse, that can be me hearing those details and helping that patient. That can be really potentially traumatizing to me as well. And that can happen sometimes for providers once they've started to experience compassion fatigue and burnout. Go to the next slide. So just explaining what burnout is within occupations, such occupations, the prevailing norms are to be selfless and put the other's needs first, to work long hours and do whatever it takes to help a client or a patient or a student, to go the extra mile and to give one's all. Moreover, the organizational environments for these jobs are shaped by various social, political, and economic factors, such as funding cutbacks or policy restrictions that result in work settings that are high in demand and low in resources. I feel fairly comfortable saying a lot of times you'll see individuals who are working extremely long hours, caring for others with minimal pay, and it is just expected that they are to go above and beyond. And for some people, it's a badge of honor to be able to do that, but what we know is that if a person continues to help others or help their organization and push themselves, they're gonna burn out eventually, and that's not a healthy way to go. And you know, from a financial side, if you have employees who can't make it in your system because they're so burnt out, that's financially not good for your organization either, because then you have to go through the process of hiring somebody else and retraining them, and that costs money. Versus maybe if you do some preventative work to make sure the organization is healthy and retains employees, you save yourself some money and have better employees. Next slide, please. So some causes of burnout, structure of education. Some of these were in relation to the healthcare system as well. So barriers to seeking treatment. For instance, military is a perfect example. A lot of individuals might not express that they are experiencing some anxiety or depression because they are part of the military, and then if that is in their record, that can prevent them from possibly getting certain positions in the future. Sleep deprivation, debt, lack of supportive mentors or supervisors, if you don't have a lot of flexibility. I think we're learning that a lot now because of COVID. Certain organizations are set up to be more flexible for their employees than others. And it's really a blessing if you do have an organization that allows you to be a bit more flexible. Certain personality characteristics, you have a lot on your plate. So is there anything for you all that you can speak of your current organization or some past organizations maybe you've worked with? Because I feel like we all probably have worked in some sort of organization that had some characteristics that could have been improved upon to make them a bit more healthy. Is there anything that stands out for you guys?
I will add here too, which Sarah, you've captured it very well, but burnout is never like the fault or responsibility of you as an individual. The burnout is a response to what's going on in your system. And so, like Sarah said earlier, if there's burnout going on, even if it's just one person, it is really the organization's responsibility to help change their demands and environment to make it healthier for them.
Absolutely. I was having this conversation last night. Actually, we were talking about some people that I had gone to college with that are working on Wall Street, and like a past college friend of mine who had shared how many individuals were doing Adderall and cocaine in order to stay awake because they work in finance. And we had the conversation of like, they make an incredible amount of money. But to me, I'm like, why not just pay that person like half? So still a lot. But then, you know, they work half the time. I just feel like that would make more sense. But it is the nature of the business and the organization that you work insanely high hours. And yeah, you're going to make a lot of money, but at what cost? So yeah,
Yeah, Sarah, when I hear you offer that example, I think the piece that comes up for me is like when organizations don't see people as whole beings, like that they have like all of these other needs besides, work is just one part of all of us.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think you're right. It's tricky for, I think, certain organizations to see you're a person, not just a machine. Next slide. So these are some additional characteristics of burnout, things you might notice in yourself or perhaps you've noticed in others for when you might be starting to experience burnout. And a lot of times I think too, recognizing this in the context of, are you experiencing anxiety, depression because of, that's what you're currently experiencing, or are your symptoms that you're experiencing a result of your work or in the organization that you're working in? Because some of these can kind of blend over into anxiety, depression symptoms, but it really might just be burnout. You can go to the next slide, Sarah. I'm gonna get through the time. Really briefly want to talk about moral injury. Can you guys give me a thumbs up or something if you've heard of it? You know what I'm talking about? Okay, so some of you have not, some of you have. Okay, so I'll explain real quick, since some of you have. But a lot of times, for instance, we'll get into positions. I think probably fair to say that a lot of you are in the roles that you're in because you would like to help others. What happens though sometimes is we are part of systems that consistently prevent us from doing our jobs. And a lot of times we see that in healthcare, that the system is currently preventing us from being able to provide the high quality care that we have intended to provide. So a lot of times pre-COVID, we were having battles with insurance companies, and when you are using an electronic health record system, you have to type in all these different things and click all these boxes, and that prevents us to providing the type of care we wanted to provide, or insane work hours. And then next slide, please, Sarah. Now during COVID, we kind of see and got to see how the system has failed us to a certain extent. First, we didn't have enough PPE, which some places are still struggling with. We continue to have this challenge with testing, with not just getting the test done, but getting the results done and getting it done fast enough. What kind of professional and personal risks we're dealing with. And that's just not even in healthcare, that's with all of our organizations right now. What kind of risks are we dealing with? But feeling kind of that sense of betrayal from the healthcare system, perhaps from the government, that we have been, this is like a moral injury. It hurts us because we're unable to do what we have been trained and sought out to do. Does that resonate with anybody? Yes, ma'am. Sarah, you can go to the next slide. So how to kind of cope with this right now. So listening to your colleagues and listening to yourself for feelings of guilt and shame. People are kind of beating themselves up at times for not being able to do what they've intended to do or wanted to do or how they want to help. Affirmation, agreeing that this is hard right now, this is a challenge. Advocating as much as possible and focusing on what's within your control and helping others to do the same. So it's again walking that balance of really focusing, there's only so much that is within your control, but maybe what is within your control is advocating for yourself, for your organization, for your partners in your community, to make these changes. Validate potential challenges of leadership and the limitations, because a lot of times leadership are in that tricky position as well. And just grounding techniques for yourself of you're in this moment, there's only so much that you can do. So in this moment, as I sit in this chair, typing at my computer, this is what I can do right now. Next slide, please. So this is an organizational kind of chart of how does your organization support a culture of safety, and what is the manager and supervisor's roles in these organizations. So this can be helpful for you to just kind of look at with your leadership team at your organization, just to kind of recognize what are we doing at a whole organization level, policies, procedures to support our staff and the employees and the role that we're trying to have, and what are the managers or the supervisors' roles, and how are they supporting these organization goals to make sure that we're in and a part of healthy organizations. Next slide, please. Just some resilience building strategies for an organization. So moving towards your goals, having accountability with that, keeping things in perspective, having a hopeful outlook. What specific kind of organizational practices could help not only encourage resilience within your organization, but what other kind of things do you recognize within perhaps the organization you're in now that's really helping to ensure that staff are supported and it's a healthy place to work?
My closest coworker and I literally have a meeting once a week to talk about our feelings with each other.
Nice.
Which is partly, partly I think a good way to provide mutual care with each other, but it's also the space where if we've had bumpy feelings towards each other during the past week, where we can regularly air those and communicate about those. And so I think it's, as well as a care thing, like building up a healthy habit of honest and constructive communication, which always feels better, on the other end of it.
Yeah. I'm going to brag on Amelia for a minute, but our other teammate, Lisa, she has 2 boys, and Amelia is consistently accommodating because, as you all know, COVID has thrown all kinds of schedules out the window. So consistently accommodating and trusts us to know that we're going to get our work done and we're going to do what we need to do. So it's not really like a question or a battle, and Lisa doesn't have to be like, oh no, I have to go take my son to the doctor. Work is gonna be such an issue. No, it's like Amelia's supportive and understands that. So that really helps us feel valued and appreciated, and most importantly, feel trusted. So once we feel trusted, we want to do a good job and prove that we're trustworthy. Go to the next slide, Sarah. These are just some quick self-care strategies you can do at work. I know we're not, most of us, in offices, some of us are, but these are just quick things that you can do for yourself when you're maybe just having a moment. And again, you can do this at home, or these are kind of, I wrote these intentionally for if you are in an office. So that's things you can look at. Next slide. Sorry, I know I'm going over time now. And this is, I think, the last slide anyway of what you can do, which we've already kind of talked about, to foster self-care in your organization. So, yeah. I think I'm done, right?
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sarah. I wish we were in person so we could all clap, but I'm clapping. So, and I love watching the visual claps on Zoom. It makes me happy. Feels like the gang's all here. And we do have, roughly to respect folks' time and things like that, I know folks have other calls that they have to get to. We have about 10 minutes for any questions that came up for folks during the presentation, or just even any topics that y'all want to get a little bit deeper into. And you can drop it in the chat, or you can feel free to unmute yourself and let us know what's on your mind in regards to that awesome presentation.
And I just want to say really quickly too, I dropped a couple of resources that the folks from COE had shared with us in the chat box. We'll also be sending that out in an email to folks who participated, so you'll get that. And I don't know, Sarah, I want to ask thoughts on, are you okay sharing the presentation with folks as well? So we can do that as well.
Well, I just want to make a comment. The portion on burnout and self-care and work, I definitely agree that those are kind of cultural things in the office and the work that you're doing. Having having supervisors or an environment that's conscious of, you know, the strain that the work and life is putting on your people is very important to keep productivity high, and to honestly to keep people in the jobs, because if you have highly talented people, they have options, and if your work is stressing the people out, they will choose other options. And you know, that's very, very important. I've dealt with that in the past, and I think one of the biggest things is it just being mentioned, and making sure that the people in your organization recognize it, and it's part of the management process.
Absolutely. And like feeling like if you have an issue with, you know, either an individual in your organization or the organization as a whole or whatever, that you have a space to go to somebody and let them know what your issue is, and they will listen and respect and respond appropriately. Like that doesn't happen all the time. Or you know, it's like interesting when we'll talk to, you know, some of the frontline workers, kind of like what I think you mentioned, Sarah, like some of the frontline workers, and then we talk to some of the leadership, and it's like there is this just huge gap between what each other thinks is going on. And that's, you know, a problem a lot of times leads to people just feeling like not listened to and not heard or respected. So thank you, Marquise. Appreciate that.
Yeah, I'm hearing some ways that workplaces can sometimes also be making things worse, especially when they're not showing up for you in the ways that you need them to. And how I think that also some organizations are taking for granted that a lot of places aren't hiring right now or can't operate. And so folks may not have the option to leave and go somewhere else. And so being like, we don't have to work on our like communication skills and showing up for people, because where are they going to go? I've definitely heard people say that, especially around academia. And I see Sarah talking about the work schedules, so 40-hour work weeks, maybe not being the most conducive outside of COVID, and maybe extra, that's not the right word I'm looking for, maybe even less conducive during a COVID time. Any other things that stood out to folks during the presentation?
I wanted to add something that has helped me a lot over the years. The decade I spent in graduate school is focusing not on how I spend my time, but how I spend my energy. And so like Sarah mentioned, like you have a 40-hour work week ahead of you. Well, my energy is pretty high today, and so I think I can accomplish these 3 tasks, not I'm going to work on these 3 tasks for a whole 8-hour work day. Or if my energy is low, thinking like I need some low energy task, I'm not going to get big quantities of things done today. And so focusing on what my energy level is at and how I want to spend it helps me kind of balance all the pressures of being productive.
Yeah, what are some other coping mechanisms or strategies that folks have developed to get through this time, or that you've heard from other folks that you're working with?
I think also kind of like jumping off of what Amelia said, like being very flexible in terms of like my expectations of myself and I guess even others, because I just really don't know what the day is going to bring. Or so being gracious with myself that like, hey, like I planned to do these 3 things today and I felt like I could, but it just didn't happen. And that's all right. And just being understanding that we don't really know what people are dealing with right now, especially. So just managing my expectations better.
Hearing managing expectations, I'm also seeing setting up specific workplaces in the home to kind of create some boundaries. I saw Marquise unmute and then mute really fast, I think. Sorry. I kind of like caught that like some Hawkeye focus or something.
No, I was trying to not interrupt you as you were reflecting, but I think one of the things that I've seen, coping mechanisms that I've used trying to get through these times is when having conversations with folk, just give a little space to decompress before you get into the business. You know, just let it go where it needs to go for a second, and then just remember to circle back around to the purpose of the call, because man, those underlying things are going to be there. You clear the air, and then the business will handle itself, and then you can move on. But that's helpful. That's been extremely helpful.
Yeah, I'm hearing recognizing the massive not element in the room. That's really good. I need coffee. The massive elephant in the room of what's going on and how it's affecting people. I see something similar from Calvin talking about guilt from not being able to be motivated the entire workday, whether it's from, I'm assuming Calvin, whether it's from those outside forces or even just like internally having to be quarantined but motivated at the same time, can be a lot to work with. Any closing thoughts before we wrap up on this very productive day? I see a couple people unmuting and muting.
I've been going back and forth for a little bit. I just want to say, Amelia, I really, really appreciate the reframe of honoring your energy rather than the time that you have accessible to you. I think I continue to feel crushed by guilt. If I don't wake up and feel like I can accomplish the same amount as I did the day before or the day before that. And it just turns into this shame spiral. And I can't even, like, when I'm in it, I can't even give myself permission to, like, all right, go reground. It's just like sitting there like, why can't I do this? Why can't I do this? And it's destructive and so unhelpful. And so I really, really thank you for saying it. One. And I think the other thing that has helped me, and like I recognize I am coming from a huge place of privilege, and I feel incredibly lucky to be employed and have a place to live. That being said, I live in a 400 square foot space, and waking up and moving 10 feet to the right to work all day is very challenging after a while. So some of the things I've done besides like going outside and getting sun and walking, I'll go get in my car and drive around the block for 10 minutes to feel like I'm shifting my space, or that I'm driving to an office. And I know that's a silly thing it might seem like a silly thing to do, but that it feels like a routine more. It feels like, oh, I'm getting up, I'm going somewhere, and I'm going to reground in that new space and that new mindset. And it's been really helpful. And yeah, suggestion. I love listening to music during that time. I usually sing very loudly at the top of my lungs and just reset when I get back. That's it.
Yeah, I do something similar, Catherine. Like some days if I'm feeling like really cooped up, because I work in my bedroom, I live with roommates. So this is really like my only space where I can do meetings. And so I do like two things that have been really helpful is like sometimes I'll just get up and walk to my bus stop and back. And then I kind of feel like I've commuted somewhere. And then also because I'm in my room all day, I'll use like the Pomodoro method that I'll use for school of like 25 minutes of like intense focus. And then 5 minutes of like doing a task to make my room a more pleasant space, whether it's like folding my laundry or picking up random things that have been put on my dresser and then it kind of, when I come back, I feel like my space is decluttered, and then I can kind of not be sitting at my desk looking around my room being like, I really need to clean that up, but I don't have time for that right now. So.
I see Yvonne's note in the chat about gratitude. And that actually is kind of one of my go-to practices when I'm like really drowning in anxiety about the world or personally, whatever, just like forcing myself to find and write down some like very tangible physical things that happened that day, as even if all I've got is like the coffee was strong, but to really focus and hone in on that.
Awesome. Thanks, y'all. And looking at the time, I think we're going to go ahead and wrap up. I see Tracy going, yeah.
It was more of like agreeing with Sarah's comment around gratitude.
But thank you all for taking the time to stay on the call, listen. Thank you, Sarah and Amelia, for all the work that y'all put into this as well. And if everyone could just we'll do like a one-word checkout, but we won't have everyone go around and do it just for the sake of time. So if you want to put one word in the chat of how you're feeling right now, and if there's any like last minute tips and tricks that you want to throw in the chat while we're wrapping up, feel free to do that too. Go wild. And I'm going to pass it to Tracy before y'all log off because we have an awesome evaluation for y'all to fill out.
Well, and I want to extend my gratitude not only to Amelia and Sarah, but also Sarah and Avery. You know, I started here at the beginning of this, acknowledging the passion that they brought to this topic when we were talking about what it would mean to bring back our agency partners. And I do believe that this is a topic that you could cover anytime, but it feels so relevant right now. And they just really dove into this and worked with Amelia and Sarah to put together an amazing presentation. So I want to just extend my thanks to them and appreciative of all of you who showed up, our agency partners, to participate in this. As we do at Rural Forward, we are very appreciative of your feedback on not only our facilitation, but also the topic and the timeliness. As I also mentioned at the beginning, we haven't brought our agency partners together since last August, and it would be incredibly helpful for me to hear your feedback about this. And, you know, I'm definitely thinking a little bit about the future and how we can support each other. You know, we're going to be in this space for a while. And I know in the networking session that we had before this, there were some great connections that were made. So I would really appreciate you taking the time to give us some feedback. And I want to, it reminded me, thinking about the future, I feel like this connects really well to our topic. I was looking at my mask this weekend and I had the most interesting moment of like, I'm going to find this in 2 years, you know, one of these masks in 2 years. And it's going to remind me of this time and that we've gotten, you know, I got through it. And that was the first time in the last few months that I was actually like, I had that realization that there is a future, right? Like there's going to be a day beyond COVID pandemic. And I realized that comes from an immense place of privilege. But it also gave me a lot of hope in that moment. So I am very appreciative of all of you being here, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.
Bye.
Oh, and one last thing, we did record this. We will be making it available. We'll be sending out the resources. So it's going to take a while for this to download it, for us to get it uploaded on our YouTube channel, but we'll get it out in, if not tomorrow, early next week for everyone. So thanks again for sharing, and we'll see y'all again soon.
Bye. Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everybody.
Thank you so much.